Well, hello and welcome. Again, I'm Bobby, the pastor of discipleship here at Christ United, and I am thankful that you are joining us for today's devotion. Now, we are in yet another day of our first week of Advent, and I am so thankful that this past Sunday, we looked to one of the Christmas classics that so many have grown up on and truly love and have made it a tradition to watch for every year of Christmas, and that we got a chance to go back to rewatch just a little bit of it and to remind ourselves of the message of hope. The message of hope that has been within our world since the coming of Christ. Now, we are thankful that we get a chance to take a step back and to look back at moments of our message on Sunday. And so we just ask for you to sit down, relax. If you haven't heard Sunday's message, this is a great opportunity for you to get a snippet and to be able to go back and rewatch the whole sermon. But for now, let's take a look back.
Now, although there's this word of warning, there's also, Isaiah brings a word of hope. Isaiah doesn't just say, hey, that you're doomed before God. He says, if you turn to God, there's something that God is going to do. But even if you don't, God will still fulfill His promises to His people. He says that there's a light that will shine in the darkness, that there's going to be an increase in God's people's joy. And that's pretty amazing to think that there's this impending judgment that because of Israel's bad behavior and about them turning away from God, that even though God is going to judge them, God is still going to increase their joy. That God is still saying that there's a light that is going to shine in the darkness. And that's where we pick up in verse 4. In verse 4, this promise says, "For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian." Now this yoke, it's an interesting word, this yoke of their burden. A yoke is basically a long wooden bar that's fit across an ox or a cattle, and usually in pairs, and they would drive or pull a cart or a plow in order to do whatever work that they're supposed to do. And so the yoke of their burden, whenever a greater nation would come in and conquer a lesser nation, they would say that the yoke of that greater nation was placed upon the shoulders of the weaker nation. Now, sometimes the weaker nation would actually want to be under the yoke of the greater nation. And this yoke was like the taxes or the tribute that they were supposed to pay to the nation in order that they might have protection. But then there are also times whenever a greater nation would come in and conquer and place a heavy burden upon the people that they've conquered. And yet, here we find that God is going to do something. God is going to break the rod of their oppressors and break that yoke of burden that is placed across their shoulders. So how is He going to do this? How is God going to break the rod of the oppressors and to break that rod or the yoke that is placed across His people's shoulders? Verse 6. "For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon His shoulders, and He is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." A child. That seems really surprising, doesn't it? That's the way in which God is going to free His people. That He is going to break the rod of their oppressors and break the yoke of their burden. That it's going to be a child. Now, back in the ancient Near East, there were all the ways these prophecies that were out there about the coming king. And this coming king, they would say, this is the kind of name that they're going to have. And they would start, naming the characteristics of the coming king. So these names that we have here, there are 4 names that are giving to this coming king, this son that is going to be born. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. You see, the ultimate oppression of sin that weighs upon God's people, God is going to take that burden upon Himself in His Son. You see, when authority rests on Christ's shoulders, we have hope. When authority rests on Christ's shoulders, we have hope. I think for many of us, this is really difficult because we think that the authority belongs to each one of us. That in order to be the best or to do the things that we feel like we should do or to go the places we think we should go and to have the things that we think we should have, we think it's all up to us. We end up placing ourselves under our own authority. And when we think about the world's expectations of us, to be the best mom or dad, to be the very best at everything, mediocrity is not something that you can settle for. The burden is too great for us to bear. And even when we think about our own expectations of where our lives should be, we can't possibly bear that even on our own. We can't do things under our own power, but when we place authority upon Christ's shoulders for our lives, we can rest in the hope that God is good, that God is faithful, that no matter the circumstances or where our lives have ended up, that God will empower us to do all the things that God has called us to do, no matter what that is. See, when we place authority on Christ's shoulders instead of our own, we can have